to show you how to decorate this adorable beach themed cake. So I'm going to start by making the waves. I got my bottom tier out of the refrigerator and I just want to measure the circumference so I know how long to roll out this fondant. So I'm doing the fondant in ombre, so I'm going to do a bunch of different colors. I'm making sure I rolled that out long enough. I'm cutting it in half and then taking my tool and just cutting waves on the top and the bottom. They're two separate strips. Then I'm going to go over to my cake, get a little bit of water down. I'm going to start in the very back of the cake and wrap this around. Once I get to the back, I'm going to take my scissors and cut it and then press that seam together and press the fondant strip against the cake. Then I'm going to get some water on the bottom third of that fondant and on the cake underneath it and do the same process, starting in the very back, wrapping it around. I'm going to make sure that the bottom half is stuck to that water and the top half isn't stuck to anything. It's going to be able to pull away from the cake. And I did make a tutorial where I go into more detail on how to make these fondant waves, and I'm going to link that in the description for you. But I'm just going to do the same process with the whole thing. So I'm starting in the very back, wrapping it around the cake, and then cutting the seam and pressing it together. And once I have all of that done, I am going to take my dry paintbrush and just remove any cornstarch that's on here. And then I'm going to take my palette knife and pull these waves away. That way I'm going to give them a little bit of motion. And that looks good. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. And now I need to make the decorations. I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And I forgot to mention I do have Tylose powder mixed into all of my fondant. I measured my cake and printed these out the correct size, rolled my fondant out pretty thin, and I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method to make these decorations. So number one, you're going to trace it onto the fondant. Number two, you're going to cut it out of the fondant. And then the third step, you're going to smooth your cuts, because anytime you cut anything out of fondant, it's going to be a little jagged and you want to make it look nice and pretty. So I'm going to do that for all of these decorations. Now, all of these pictures will be linked in the description for you. You want to make sure that you're tracing the inner detail as well. And then I'm just taking my Dresden tool for these palm leaves and just deepening that detail. And then again, cutting it out and smoothing my cuts. And I'm going to do this process every time I cut anything out of fondant. I might not show me smoothing my cuts, but every single time I cut anything out of fondant, I'm going to take my time and smooth it. Now I want to add some palm details in here, so I just took my X-Acto knife and cut little triangle shapes all over this entire thing. And let's set those aside. I'm going to work on the glasses. Same process. So I'm tracing the pink lenses onto the pink fondant, cutting it out, smoothing my cuts, and doing the same thing for the lenses. And let's do the same thing for the sun. So just tracing this onto the fondant and cutting it out. And then I have a circle cutter just to get that centerpiece on there. And I'm going to do the same thing for the glasses that I did before. And for the smile, I'm just using two circle cutters just to cut a little smile and then tracing the lenses. Let's get a little bit of water behind all of these pieces and adhere them. And I'm just using my Dresden tool to add the teeth detail. Now I'm making the anchor and I'm doing the same exact process, and I know it's a little boring, I'm sorry, but trace it on there and then we're going to cut it out. Now this is a thicker piece of fondant. When I have a thicker piece of fondant, I make a guideline cut first. So I'm just sticking the very tip of my Dresden, nope, that's an X-Acto knife, sticking that into the fondant, and I'm just making a guideline. I don't have the tip all the way down to the cutting board because I don't want to mess up the fondant. Once that guideline is done, then I can stick the tip all the way down and cut this out. This way, like I said, I'm not going to distort the very top edge of the fondant and it's going to look nice and pretty. Be careful when you peel this away, as the fondant could still be stuck and you don't want to tear the piece. And I'm going to flip it over and smooth it using my fingers and my tools, smooth it from the back, and then flip it right side up and smooth it from the front. And I just want to realign that, make sure that is very straight. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the heart. So I'm tracing the heart onto a tan piece of fondant because I'm going to cover it with sand. And then I have these little sweet stamps and I'm just getting them in the right position and pressing them down. If you don't have sweet stamps, you can always take a Dresden tool like I'm doing for the plus sign and just draw the letters on there. That's what I did in the past when I made this before. Then I'm going to cut this out like always, smooth my cuts. Now I'm making the life raft, so I have 2 circle cutters, and I'm starting with the center one, and then I'm putting the bigger one around there and just making sure that it's even, and then take my fingers and smoothing it out. And you can see that fondant is a little thicker, so I have some red fondant here. I'm using my little strip cutter, and I'm getting a little bit of water behind each strip, and I'm making sure these two are exactly on top of each other. I'm tucking it behind, and then I can take my X-Acto knife and just cut the excess off and press them together. And then I turn it 90 degrees and do the same thing. So I have 4 of these wrapped around this little life raft. And this looks good. I'm going to set all of those aside. Now I want to make the shells, and I have a bunch of white and a little bit of brown candy melts, and I am stirring some of these brown ones into the white, but I'm not mixing them completely. I want it to have a marbled effect. And I have all of these shell molds, and I got them so long ago. There's similar ones on Amazon. I will link them in the description. I'm just filling it with the chocolate, tapping it on the countertop to remove the excess, and then using my knife just to even it out. And then I'm doing the same thing for the rest of the molds. And I do have a video where I go into detail on how I make these chocolate shells, and I will link that in the description. And I'm going to put these in the refrigerator for a couple hours to set. Now I'm making the sand, so I have a bunch of graham crackers. I'm putting them in my food processor, and I'm going to turn that on until it is a fine crumb like sand, and just going to dump this in my little container and set that aside. Now I want to remove these shells from the molds, so I'm just popping these out. You got to be careful. I ended up breaking that really big starfish, so you just got to be careful when you remove these. I could set those aside as well. Got my cake out of the refrigerator. I did stack it off camera, and I'm just getting a little bit of non-toxic glue on the outer edge of the cake drum and on the back of the ribbon just to finish this off. And then I want to get a little bit of piping gel on this heart, but I'm not getting the piping gel in the inside of the letters and the plus sign. And then I'm going to take some of that graham cracker dust and just put that on top and shake the excess off back in that container. And I'm just using my tool just to get rid of the dust that's filling in those letters so you can see them. Now I want to get sand on the cake board and on the cake. So I'm getting a little bit of piping gel all along the drum and on that tier of the cake. And I'm doing this in little sections, getting little spoonfuls on here. And I'm spreading the sand around to make sure it's covering the entire drum. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the first layer. And I got a little bit of icing behind the heart and stick that to the very front of the cake. And I'm going to get icing behind wherever these decorations are touching the cake, I'm getting some icing behind it. Anytime icing seeps out, I'm just going to remove it with a dry paint brush. Now sometimes I use piping gel, sometimes I use icing. I feel like icing holds a little better, so for bigger decorations, I like to use icing. I'm getting a toothpick behind the sun. Do you see how I'm anchoring it down into the cake? It's hanging on the cake like a picture frame. That way it's not going to fall off. And then just decorating the cake using icing and piping gel just to adhere all of these to the cake. Now I put the chairs on the very top just to see where it looks best. And then I got a little bit of piping gel underneath each one. I got those chairs on Amazon. I can link them in the description. I have made chairs in the past, but this time he just opted to get the non-edible ones. And then I want to put some sand on the very top of the cake. So I'm getting more piping gel down. And then again, just taking little spoonfuls of that graham cracker dust and putting this on the top of the cake. I got a little toothpick under that little life raft and get some icing behind it where it's touching the cake and stick that down. And then I'm just putting the shells on here. So sometimes I get a little icing behind it where it's going to touch the cake. If it's just going in the sand, then I just put it in the sand, and I'm just getting these shells all on here. And quickly, I want to add some buttercream clouds. So I have an icing bag with a tip number 10, and you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going up, down, making them look really puffy like a cloud. And then I'm going to take a wet paintbrush and just push in my points and smooth them out and look nice and pretty. And here is the beach cake. I just love this design. I have made variations of this quite a few times. Each time I make it a little different, but it is so much fun to make. I hope you guys try it out.